Hello, this is Vanessa Gorman, and this video is going to help walk you through making Greek trees on the Perseids site of some fairly straightforward sentences this time. So the first few sentences of Xenophon's Hellenica. Last time we walked through the interface and made a tree of the first sentence. You should log back into your account and call up the file that you made last time of Xenophon's Hellenica. When you get to the sentence list, you should click on number 1, and you'll see the sentence that we already did last time. Now we're going to go to the next sentence, so we'll click on the next arrow up at the top here and get sentence number 2. Now, as you give it a few seconds, it's coloring in different colors. This is that morphological pre-analysis that it does. And so it's very useful because you can see red is used both for verbs and for conjunctions. Adverbs are orange, nouns are black, or essentially black. We don't happen to have any adjectives here at the moment. But this gives you an immediate quick check as to whether the parts of speech are right or not, and you'd be surprised how helpful this is. So let's talk about how we go about making a tree, or treeing, as I like to call it. We start with the beginning of the sentence, the first main verb we come across. Click on it, then click on the root of the sentence. So what's this sentence saying? We're saying that the Lacedaemonians and the Athenians fought a naval battle immediately again, right? So they fought the naval battle is the main verb, so we hang it on the root of the sentence. Now, in this case, we have conjoined subjects, the Lacedaemonians and the Athenians, so we're going to click on each one, and in this case, I control and then click to select both at once, and then click on the chi, and they are joined together here on the chi. And as subjects, we want to hang them on the verb upon which they are dependent. Likewise, we have these two adverbs that want to hang on the verb, and so we click and hang. Now we also have a coordinated main sentence over here, main clause, joined together by the de. So the de is actually going to go on the root, and this first verb is going to hang on the de, just as the second verb is going to hang on the de. And we have here the Lacedaemonians 1 with agesandridos commanding. So the Lacedaemonians 1, so we hang the subject on the verb. And we have a few things left. Now this 3 unused tells me that I haven't hung 3 things. And if you click on highlight unused, it will tell you which 3 things, which is quite useful sometimes. We have a genitive absolute clause here. So in a genitive absolute, you hang the subject on the verb of the absolute, just as you would on the verb of the sentence. But then you have to decide, what is this genitive absolute modifying? Is it modifying the second verb of the sentence, or is it modifying both verbs? In this case, I think it's more appropriate to hang it solely on the second verb. But this is always a judgment call. Much of what you have to do is a judgment call based on experience and understanding language. And then finally, the only thing we have left is the chi at the beginning of the sentence, which is what we call a sentence adverb. It's one of these things that Greeks love so well. And we hang that on the highest element of the sentence. So there, we're all done. I'm going to unclick that because we don't need it anymore. Now we have to check the morphologies of these words and make sure they're correct. And I simply just start at the beginning of the sentence, click on the chi, and right away I see it's not a conjunction in this case, it's an adverb. You probably don't have it as an adverb, so you're going to have to add the form. You click on the chi, create new, and it's already got the chi in there for you, and you just have to change it to adverb. It doesn't have a degree, so you click on the dot or the hyphens and then hit save. An alternative way of doing this is simply to use this create new form button. And if you do that, then you can type in anything you want here. So you have to make sure the lemma is correct. By going through one that's existing, if the lemma is already correct, it saves you some steps. So that's another way that you can do this. So, okay, now we have chi adverb. So that's good. Now remember, use W and E to scroll around in the sentence. So W goes forward a word. So Arethusa, the adverb, is clearly what you want. They fought, that's not in doubt. There's only one form. Again, an adverb, fine. Lacedaemonians. Now, if you'll see here, this says the word you, which means I put these forms in. The morphological analysis is not very consistent about ethnics. Some of them they put in as adjectives, and some of them they put in as nouns, and some of them they put in as both. And so I've, over the years, taken to identifying them both ways, depending on how they're being used in the sentence. So in this case, I have taken this adjectival form here, clicked on it, said create new, and then changed adjective to noun. And then you have everything already filled in for you because you worked off of the existing form. And then you hit save. So I've done that because the computer's not consistent, and I think it's silly to use that as an adjective. Others may disagree with me, that's fine, but this is the way I do it. Chi here is the conjunction, so we're fine. Athenians, same thing as the Lacedaemonioi. You may have to create your own form if you want to have them as nouns rather than adjectives. This verb, we have two choices here. Is it the imperfect or is it the aorist? I would judge it to be the aorist. Da here only comes up as an adverb for you. You have to add the conjunction, which is clearly one of the forms, right? So make sure you add that in as a conjunction. Again, the Lacedaemonians. Then we have this genitive absolute clause, and our choice is between a neuter and a masculine. Well, clearly we have a masculine commander, so that's good. And there's his name. Fortunately, the nominative is already entered in the analysis tool. Sometimes you have to go tracking down the nominative, and it can sometimes be a real chore, especially to get the accent right. All right, so we have this whole sentence that is treed, and it is analyzed morphologically. The last thing to do is to mark the relations between the nodes, the relations between the tokens, also called words, right? So we use the word node or token in addition to just saying words. So how do we approach this? Well, the thing I like to do is look for the things that never change. Conjunctions are always conjunctions. So I'm going to mark the two conjunctions with a control click on them. And then I'm going to come over to relation, and I'm going to bring down to coordinator, because that's what they are, and click apply. And now we have those two marked as coordinators. Now I have to hit escape to make it unselect those. Likewise, these adverbs are clearly adverbs, so I'm going to go and do the same thing here. We have two subjects of this verb joined by a chi, so we are going to mark them as subject, but because they are joined by a chi, we call them coordinator. You can, subcategory for any of these main categories is coordinator, a positive, or both a positive and coordinator. So these are coordinated, so we're going to hit apply, and there they are. The main verb of the sentence is the predicate, but again, there are two of them joined by a coordinator, so we're going to hit predco and apply. Lacedaemonians is another subject. Remember, another way you can label these is by right-clicking on here. Now, sometimes it goes off the bottom of the screen, but you can, sorry, I just went kaflooey there. If it's going to go off the bottom of the screen, you can pull the tree up higher and then right-click so that it doesn't. There's a subject. This is the subject of the genitive absolute, so it also needs to be marked as a subject. And then finally, we have the verb of the genitive absolute, the participle, which is not acting as a necessary argument here, right? It's not defining anything. So it is a circumstantial participle, so you wouldn't label it as an adverb. Finally, we still have, notice over here, one unused. This is also very useful because when you're done, you should have a 0 here and you should have a 0 here. If you click on this, you see the one thing unused is the sentence adverb kai. So if you right click there, sentence adverbs are among the aux, the auxiliary forms, and for sentence adverbs we use aux y. So aux p is prepositions. They are always prepositions. You never label them anything else. Aux c is subordinating conjunctions, so hoti and epe and things like that. Aux y is for sentence adverbs. Aux z is for emphasizing particles. So this is kai also. This is not. This is ge and things like that. Again, aux v we use rarely in Greek as an auxiliary verb. Usually I only use it with verbal adjectives. Aux r I don't use at all. It's for reflexives. Aux g is for punctuation. In this case, things like em dashes and parentheses. Aux x is for commas. As you can see, they come pre-labeled. And aux k is for the final punctuation of a sentence. So that also comes pre-labeled and pre-hung on the root. We ignore punctuation because they don't come from the original author. So our aux, our kai here is going to be a sentence adverb, aux y. And then we have a 0 here and a 0 here, and we're done. So we're going to save this sentence. It says saving, then it says document saved. If it comes up red and says not saved, open a new window, log into the Perseids website again, and once you're logged in, come back here and save it again. It's just you've been timed out for some reason, or you lost your internet connection or something like that. So, all right, so now let's go to the third sentence. This gets a little bit more complicated, so let's tear it apart. We have a little later, after a little of these. So let's just say a little later, Dorius, the son of Diagoras, from Rhodes to the Hellespont, sailed in. With winter was coming, or winter was beginning, excuse me. 4 and 10 ships together with the day. All right, so this is actually not very complex a sentence. We have one main verb, so that's easy to snag it and hang it on the root. He sailed in. And who sails in? Dorios. I like to keep the morphology open here so I can keep an eye on how well these are being explained and whether I'm going to have to fix them up later, or I can fix them up now if I want to. So Dorieus sailed in. Dorieus is not just him, he is the son of Diagoras. So the article is going to modify the subject and the genitive is going to modify the subject. It's telling us who he is. Now, if this ek rodu is kind of interesting because it's possible that that would modify the subject. You'd like to have an attributive article if it were going to do that, but you don't always get them, you'll find. So it's possible that he's saying Dorieus, the son of Diagoras, from Rhodes to keep him straight from some other Dorieus, or just to explain who he is. In which case you would also hang from Rhodes on Dorieus. However, in this sentence, that doesn't seem like a likely interpretation. It's much more likely that he sailed from Rhodes into the Hellespont. So this actually modifies the verb, right? It's an adverb, not if you left it on the subject explaining who he is, you would label this rhodu as an attributive, but it's not an attribute. It's an adverb in this case. Sailing into the Hellespont, so there's that prepositional phrase. Go back to the beginning. After a little of these things. So that's your temporal clause that we get at the beginning of a lot of sentences, and we'll hang that on the main verb as well. Then we go along. Winter just beginning, genitive absolute. So we hang the subject on the verb, and then again, what does it modify? I would say the main verb. There's not really a lot of choices here. He sailed in with 14 ships. So let's control click these two numbers and hang them on the chi, and hang the chi on the ships. He's sailing in with the ships, so it's going to be hanging on the verb. Now, then we have this prepositional phrase at the same time as day. So let's put them together, and again, we're sailing in. What's missing? What's usually missing? The sentence adverb. So de hangs on there. And so we now have none unused. Good. So it's not that complex a sentence. Mostly it's a bunch of prepositional phrases. So let's go through the morphologies. Meta, for some reason, because of the apostrophe, probably it didn't come up at all, so I had to supply the form. You may have to. Sometimes these elided forms have been identified and sometimes they haven't. Once you identify them, they should come up from now on. Okay? So then you have the preposition there labeled add P. Use W, so after a little, this is going to be the neuter accusative because it's a time phrase. Excuse me. De is an adverb here of these things. Again, neuter. Subject to the sentence, that's fine. The article modifies him, that's fine. His father's name is in the genitive, as you'd expect. From Rhodes. Now here, pick the one that has the capital R because this is the place. Into the Hellespont. He sailed in. He was sailing in, let's be precise. Winter's beginning. Now, we have a choice between masculine and neuter. Of course, winter is masculine, so if you go back, this is masculine, we're good. 4 is actually declinable, which is unusual, right? So here we have a bit of a problem because the ships are feminine. Now, I don't have a place where I've actually put in the feminine version here. You see that we have the nouns, the feminine version. So let's go here, click on this, create new, and make it an adjective. It doesn't have a degree, so I'm going to save this. I don't like using numerals, the green things here, because for me, these are the actual numeral 4, numeral 5, numeral 6, not the word written out. And I don't like using them as nouns either, because numbers in this form aren't really nouns. They're usually adjectives. So we have that fixed. We're going to hit chi is a conjunction. We're good with that. Deca is indeclinable, but again, I had to change it from numeral to adjective. The numbers are not analyzed consistently. Clearly, it's not the verb, so we're fine there. Ships came up for some reason without a gender, so I ignore that one because I want to have as much information as is possible, so we have the gendered version. At the same time as day, well, at the same time comes up as an adverb, but in fact here it's a preposition, so this is another case where you want to change the form and make it a preposition, and then from then on, when you get this word, both forms will come up and you can choose from them. In fact, there are times when it's actually a conjunction. I had to add it in as a conjunction. So, and then we have the noun singular feminine dative. That's good. So we're all labeled nicely. I'm going to save it now because I like to save it often. So let's label the sentence. Start with your main verb. Let's unselect that. Start with your main verb. I right click, label it a predicate. That's easy. Where's your subject to your sentence? There he is. I right click it. I label it a subject. Now, here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 prepositions. And in a long sentence, you might have a lot more, and you might not see them all at once. So one thing you can do is go to this selector tab. And under the selector tab, put in ADP for add position. Sorry, I can't type. So now it picks out all 4 prepositions for me. I can go back to the relation tab, click the top here, and call them aux P for preposition. Hit apply. Now they're all labeled already. I don't have to do them individually. This can be really useful, especially for prepositions and for coordinators. Hit escape. Now, what else are we going to do here? To sail into, what are the arguments of sail into? Well, I would argue that the necessary object is the Hellespont because he's sailing into the Hellespont. So I would label that as the object. Remember, you can have 2 objects depending on the verb. you shouldn't have 3. He's sailing out of Rhodes. That's an adverb. So we'll label that as an adverb. He's sailing after a few of these days. I'm going to call those both adverbs. So I'm going to label them both at once over here. Winter beginning. So that is an adverb, and we have a subject for this phrase, so we'll label that as a subject. With ships, clearly also an adverb, and together with they, clearly also an adverb. So click, control click, and label them both at once. And then I have 2 attributes that are joined by a conjunction. So I can do what I did before, attribute, but then co, and apply that and hit clear or escape. Go back and pick up the other attributes in the sentence. So here's 2 others over here. Got to clear the co and apply it to them. Now you see I still have 2 unused. I can click and see, it's my chi and my sentence adverb as usual. It's almost always the sentence adverb, so I will label that as XY, and the chi is a coordinator. So that sentence is done. Click to save. Number 4, it's filling in the colors, so you see the watcher of the Athenians, seeing it, signal to the generals. That's another straightforward sentence. So the main verb is signaled. The watcher is the subject. He signaled to the generals. There's an object, so we can hang that on the verb as well. Seeing these things. Now, it's not the watcher who saw these things, so it's not defining the watcher. It's not necessary to him, so it's a circumstantial participle, so we're just going to hang it as an adverb. The hangs on the noun. Of the Athenians modifies the noun, and these kinds of genitives we just label as attributes as a whole. That leaves us with 1 unused, the sentence adverb, of course. It's always the last thing I get to. So there's our sentence, pretty straightforward. Let's look at the morphology. Participle in the masculine nominative, we're happy with. Da is an adverb. The of the Athenians, make sure it's masculine because the Athenians are masculine. Now notice here, this form came in as a noun from the morphological analysis, yet the nominative plural, we had to make it into a noun. So this is what bugs me about the proper names. Masculine nominative singular, the verb is fine. Then we have a choice between masculine and neuter, and of course the generals are masculine, and it is not the verb, the optative of the verb. So, good. Now we label them as usual. The main verb is the predicate, the subject is the subject, the object is the object. Seeing is going to be an adverb. Then we have of the Athenians is going to be attributive, as are the 2 articles. So they're all going to be labeled as attributes. And then finally, of course, our sentence adverb is an XY. So yet another fairly simple sentence. Let's do one more here, which complicates things a little bit, because we're going to see 2 things here. We're going to see a subordinate clause and we're going to see a relative clause. So I can show you how to do both of them. So they attacked against him with 20 ships. 20 ships, I think. I always forget my numbers. Which Dorieus, fleeing to the land. Now let's think about what that word means. The ships of him, the triremes of him, whatever that's supposed to mean, and if I click on morphology, anoignumi, you may or may not know what that means. It's not very common. Around to roition. Okay, so let's look at this. Have a relative clause here. So let's leave that alone for the moment. We have a subordinate clause here, so let's leave that alone for the moment. Our main verb is right here, right? They attacked. Now in this case, we don't have an express subject, we simply have the article. So it stands in for the subject, and you're going to label it as the subject, even though it's not the men or the Athenians or the Lacedaemonians. You just label the article as the subject. They attacked against him. Again, I would argue that is a necessary part of that argument, because you can't attack in a vacuum. You've got to have a context. With the ships, so there we go. There's our main sentence, except of course, sentence, adverb. There's our main sentence. Now let's look at this relative clause. Hang it exactly as you would do a main sentence for the moment. So we have the main verb. Now what does this mean in this case? To go up on his ships toward the land, what's going on? I like to keep the Perseids page open for whatever I'm doing so that I can check the meaning. So I know that this is in the beginning of Xenophon's Hellenica. I've opened this up in Perseids. I've opened up the English so that I can see what it means. If I have any doubts, I can double check it there. So I'm looking for the sentence, and here's the verb right here. So I'm going to click on it, find out that it means to cause to mount or make to go up. So it sounds like he's getting on his ships, and that doesn't fit this context quite right. So I open the big LSJ, and I start looking down here, and I see that using this verb with a ship means to draw the ship up on land. And lo and behold, they cite this passage. So that's what we have going on here. He's drawing his triremes up on land. So let's just hang this as if it were a sentence for now. Drawing up the triremes of himself. Who's doing it? Dorieos. So he becomes our subject. What's the Haas doing? Well, it's the object of the fleeing. Fleeing which? Now, to the land. Is he drawing them up to the land? I doubt it. Right? He's drawing them up on the land. So he's probably fleeing to the land. So I'm going to put that all together there. And remember, too, when you're trying to figure out what's going on here, so you've got, say, where this the out to gone to. If you click on it in the sentence at the top of the page and click on this black button here, focus selection, it will center it for you so you can find it in your tree very quickly. So what haven't we done yet? Let's click and find out. Okay, we haven't done all the rest of this. So, on oignumi, what is that going to mean? That's not a word you stumble on every day, right? So let's go look it up again over here. It says to open. Okay, as it opens. As what opens? Well, if you go down a little bit, in nautical terms, it means to get into the open sea or get clear of land. That's not making sense here. I'm going to interpret it to mean where the land itself opens up, right? Where there's an opportunity to land is how I would take that. Now, if you look over in the translation and see what Mr. Bronson has done, fleeing from them towards the shore, beached his triremes as fast as he got them clear of the enemy. That's kind of a loose translation, but I'll take it. So where it opened up is how I'm going to translate that. And then, so you take the verb, hang it on the coordinating, or the subordinating particle. The subordinating conjunction. There we go. Let's get the names right. The subordinating conjunction. What verb is it dependent upon? Beaching the ships. So beaching his ships where it opened up, where the land was, there was room, right? Then we get this final preposition, near roteon. So we're going to hang that as a preposition, and that's probably, it could be where it opened up, or it could be where he beached the ships. I would argue, if nothing else, on the basis of the editorial choice of punctuation, to put it on this verb. So now we've got everything hung, except we have two different sentences. This is the relative, right? What you do with a relative clause is you take the entire relative clause, hang it like this, like a normal tree, but then the top verb of that clause hangs on its antecedent as an attribute. It's the ships which he was fleeing, right? Which he was fleeing. So the antecedent are the ships, so you hang this whole clause there. And so now you've got a completely hung tree. Let's go through morphologies. I can unhighlight that. They, again, it's just the article. De, attacked against him with the ships. Again, I've changed the number from a numeral to an adjective. It doesn't decline, so it's fine. Ships, that's wrong. I need to make it feminine, right? Um, which ships he's fleeing. Now, in this case, pronoun works because it's the word ships isn't included here. If it had been which ships repeated, I would have changed it to an adjective because it's being used as an adjective. I don't like the way they do their pronouns. Okay, so there's our subjects. He's fleeing them. That's a participle. To the land. Notice you have a choice between Gay and Gaia. He beached them, as we found out it meant. The of himself triremes. So just make sure of himself is masculine. Triremes has a number of choices, but the normal one here is going to be the accusative. Hos is a conjunction. Don't make it the adverb hos. Make it the conjunction hos. As it opened up, around, to, roition. Okay, so that's all good. Now, how are we labeling this stuff? Main verb is the predicate. That's old hat. The subject is the subject. That's old hat. He attacked against him. I would argue that that is a necessary argument, so I would call that the object. We've got some prepositions in here. I don't feel like searching them all down, so I'm going to pick them all at once and say ADP, and there they are. And I can label them AUXP all at the same time. Likewise, I can label this hos. Any subordinating conjunctions are always labeled AUXC. So there's not going to be any change. You don't have to decide anything there. It's the verb of that will take its function. So he attacked against him with these ships, so that's going to be an adverb, right? Now we've got the number, that can be the attribute. Now we've got this relative clause. And here's the subject to the relative clause, so we're going to label it subject. He beached his ships, so that's an object. He fled ships, fled which, fleeing which, that's also an object. I'm off the bottom, so I'm going to drag it up and do it again. He fled to Earth. I would argue that's also an object. You got to flee either from someplace or to someplace. Where it opened up, subordinate clause, not necessary for anything. It's not an object, so it's by default an adverb. Likewise, where it was is by default an adverb. Fleeing is a circumstantial participle. It's not defining who he is, so that also is an adverb. We have some attributes that we have to pick up, so I'll grab them all at once, right? Possession is always an attribute. We don't call that adverb usually, and label them all attributes. That leaves us with two things unlabeled. Our old friend, the sentence adverb that I forgot before, always do, and the verb of the relative clause. We hung it on its antecedent, and it is an attribute of its antecedent. Now, if it doesn't have an antecedent, if you have to assume the antecedent, you've got one of two choices. You can either supply it by supplying an elided word, as I'll show you in a bit, but that's messy most of the time. What you normally do is you treat the entire relative as you would have the antecedent. So the verb of the relative clause would be labeled the way the antecedent would have been labeled. So in other words, if the word now seen hadn't been there, but this is still modifying it, this would have been hung up here as an adverb by the ships which he fled. Okay, I'll show you some better examples as we go along so that you get a feel for this. But this should make it kind of clear where we're going with this. And I'm going to make some more videos that go through some more difficult sentences. But that's enough for today.